It's a holy moment when somebody finally hears your story and understands you and says, "Yeah, that's really bad." That's a very powerful moment in healing, but it's not the whole banana. It's a door opening, I think. And it's a door that might not even open at the beginning of your healing. It might come later, or it might come in stages. But the question of what can I do right now is the most potent question you can ask yourself. And we have to forgive a lot of the mistakes we make along the way, like having to be totally responsible for my own healing in some ways made me err on the side of over functioning, I think, or just being like overly tough on myself. But whatever, it kept me alive so I could keep learning and keep unfolding in the nuance. And now 31 years into it, I don't know what's next, like what's the next thing I'm going to learn, but I know that I'll keep learning. And the point that I'm in right now, the thing that I'm learning is really how lovely people are. I had no idea. I had no idea that they're really not just a bunch of jackasses. Occasionally people are in certain moments, maybe chronically, but by and large, what delights me is to discover that we're all sort of working together.
Okay, Anna, welcome to the show. Now, we're going to focus this conversation on your latest book, Connectability. And part of this book is around having what's called a connection wound. So, what exactly is a connection wound, and how can somebody know if they have one?
Well, it's an intuitive term, really. There's a lot of neuroscience that backs it up, but my expertise is in what it feels like to have this. So a lot of us who were neglected as kids, neglect is a big cause and driver of feeling disconnected. Also abuse, also growing up in a dysfunctional family or a family that was really odd or different than other people, maybe because they came from another country than the other kids, or they had very strict rules or were very religious or not religious where everybody else was. The things that make kids different can leave them, with wounds, scars. The deepest one, though, comes from neglect in early childhood. And we know that that connection between mother and child is so important to be able to have that eye contact, that talking, that it causes the brain to wire up and become connectable. And so when that there wasn't enough of that, the question I always had was, what can you do? Because I grew up with such a mother, and I had always known something was odd about me. And as the science has been coming out that yes, there are these things mirror neurons, I'm like, wow, that explains things a lot to me. And so I had struggled very much to feel connected to other people. I thought it was more like a character defect. And the more I learned about complex PTSD, which I've been diagnosed with, the more I found out this is common. And now that I'm a YouTuber and I get feedback from hundreds of thousands of people in relationship to videos I put out about my experience of the symptoms, I've come to feel this is a virtually universal symptom for traumatized people. And it's something we have in common with others who may or may not have been traumatized, but let's say they're on the autism spectrum, or they're socially awkward, or they're natural introverts, that feeling connected with people doesn't come easily. But I have found and demonstrated in my own life it's something that you can learn. And I've written the manual on how exactly to do it.
Amazing, amazing. So, the basic symptom of it is that you find it difficult to connect with others, and this is a sign that you've probably been neglected at some level in early childhood.
It could be a sign, but I always want to acknowledge, like, it could just be you're made that way. Not people are very different in this respect. Some people just have such natural ease with other people, and others are more circumspect. They hang at the edge of the room. They don't feel that comfortable rushing in. These are all part of like normal ways that people turn out. But the thing that I'm most in touch with is when there's a trauma wound, a wound to the connection. And the thing is, for people who grew up with autism, live with autism, who grew up with introversion, there's often a lot of bullying that goes along with it, which is in itself a trauma. And the key thing that happens with this when it's awkward to connect with people is it can feel so stressful, whatever the cause is, that you tend to avoid people. Even though you want to have relationships, you find yourself avoiding people and going into isolation. And I think for all of us, like however much we normally isolate, we had to do it more during the pandemic. There's a few people who loved it. They were just like, bring it on, more lockdown, please. They were so happy to be relieved of having to hang out with people. But a lot of us became rusty. We got to look at the sort of dark side of our avoidant tendencies. And there's a lot of pain associated with feeling left out, cast out, not belonging, overlooked, not included, denied a chance to participate. It's a lot of pain going on out there. And when I was struggling with it, when I realized 12 or 16 years into my own healing from complex PTSD, I realized how shallow my relationships were. I had to do this new wave of healing to find out why am I like that and what do I do about it. I'm not one to put most of the emphasis on why. It's like, what do I do about it? That's the first order of business for me in my approach to healing. Why is a big question, and it doesn't necessarily bring solutions.
Yeah, so that's so interesting what you're saying about, you know, when somebody gets bullied early in life, then naturally they might want to avoid people
Yes.
because, you know, it's not safe to be in a social group or social environment. So they have a tendency towards isolation, and this becomes like a vicious circle. So for somebody that maybe has experienced that kind of bullying or yeah, doesn't feel safe in groups, um, have you any thoughts about how best to sort of take small steps towards feeling okay in those situations again?
Yeah, well, we think of this automatically as like a psychological thing, like you got bullied and therefore you don't feel safe. And that's definitely part of it. But there's also this the way that anything that's stressful, especially if you, and bullying is a trauma, and early trauma especially, can leave you. This is so much what my first book, Re-Regulated, is about. It leaves you with this core trauma symptom of dysregulation. A lot of people are talking about dysregulation right now. Usually, what they're talking about is emotional dysregulation, which is devastating. It can cause terrible problems. It's a part of the big pie of neurological dysregulation. But neurological dysregulation is this big thing that's full of many symptoms you can feel, mostly symptoms you can't feel. It affects almost everything that your nervous system governs, or it can. And so growing up with trauma can leave you with this tendency to sort of glitch out right when you need your full awareness the most. Your left brain, the left front cortex will become inactive relative to normal. Your right front cortex, which is emotions, gets stronger. When our emotions, when we're lashing out in emotional dysregulation, other people are like, something's wrong with that person. I don't like this. But a lot of the symptoms of dysregulation, it's a sense of disorientation, discombobulation physically, lack of focus, brain fog, feeling clumsy, feeling suddenly like you don't remember why you came into the room. A whole bunch of things aren't working. There's these cognitive deficits. There's also all these metabolic sort of disruptions that can go on where your hormones are not functioning properly. They're coming at the wrong time. A child who's sexually abused, a girl who is sexually abused, will go into puberty an average of 2 years earlier than her peers, her non-abused peers. There are so many changes that go on in the body as a result of trauma. Some you can feel, most you can't. What you feel is the tip of the iceberg, but it's probably, as far as we know, it's the dysregulation on so many levels of physiological functioning that are responsible for that high correlation we see between early trauma and chronic disease. And so most people are well aware that people who were traumatized as kids are more prone to addiction, depression, anxiety, rough relationships, maybe. Few are aware, even though we've known for decades, but rarely is this fully integrated into like your doctor's awareness when you come in saying, I don't know, I'm just like exhausted all the time. Will they know that there's a high probability that trauma is playing a role in that? And everything, it's just the list of effects covers so much that the question is more like, what doesn't it damage? And so connectability is this subtle thing that sort of hasn't, I don't think it's quite been on the radar enough. And it's so important. And people who have easy connectability, well, it's like a lot of things. When people are I don't know, sometimes I call them normies. I don't mean to be dismissive, but people who aren't so traumatized, they will have advice like, well, why don't you make more friends? Or why don't you date nice people? Or why don't you go to bed earlier? Or, these like very good common sense ideas. But when you are riddled with trauma symptoms, you might as well say, why don't you fly to Mars? There's this huge like gap between what would be helpful for a person and what you're capable of doing because of all these other ways that you're disrupted and addled. And then so until you know that dysregulation is playing a role, it's very hard to solve life problems. So the problem of being very lonely and isolated a lot of the times, what broke through for me, because I was what I call a covert avoider. I looked like I had a connected life, but I wasn't connecting deeply with people. And I think that's very common. Very shallow friendships. That became apparent to me at a certain point when I really needed other people's help and I didn't have any help. And I can tell you more about that. But when I learned about dysregulation, I found out why it was so hard for me to have close friendships. Even though I'm a nice person, I like people, I wanted friends, but being around people could be so dysregulating that unconsciously I was just finding ways to hold them at arm's length or avoid hanging out with them at all so that I could manage my own stress, so that I could sort of keep my head together. If I would get, let's say if you and I had a little spat over a cup of coffee or something, before I had much healing from my dysregulation, I would get dysregulated. I would have trouble controlling that maybe for a day, maybe for a couple days. I could end up unable to really perform my job. I would be very spaced out. There were just these huge downstream effects of ordinary things that happen with people. And so it becomes extremely limiting. And I just kept asking myself, why do people like me have to make their lives so small? And it comes down to this. This is like one of the number one things. When you've been through a lot of trauma, you sometimes have to keep your life small because it's just so triggering to be around people. And when I say trigger, I don't mean the way, everybody says the word trigger. I specifically mean it causes dysregulation. It causes your nervous system to become glitchy, and you feel out of your body, you feel confused, you feel stressed, you feel overwhelmed as a result of some stimuli, like a criticism, a spat, things like that.
Wow, wow, there's so much there. Well, the good news is that you've written a book now, which is essentially, you could say, argue it's a manual for becoming more reconnected, particularly if you've had a difficult
Yeah.
developmental past.
Yeah.
Um, to what extent can we actually say that this is a skill that we can learn and that it is malleable? You're not fixed in your ability to connect with other people.
Well, you're of all the people I know, Niall, you talk to the people who are really out at the forefront of discovering that not everything is as we thought. And so if we thought something was not malleable, we're probably wrong. And if we thought you could fix everything, we're probably wrong. And until we have like a little scope that you can go, well, what's the percentage, which we don't have, we have to go by feel and go, I'll tell you my case. I grew up in a commune. My mother was a drug addict and an alcoholic. There was a lot of violence, a lot of neglect, not always food. I have very typical symptoms of complex PTSD from that childhood. I've overcome them to a large degree, despite there being no literature about how to do that at the time that I overcame it.
I'm sorry, Anna. I'm just curious to
Yeah.
ask. A commune, is that like a shared living situation? What exactly is a commune?
Yeah. Well, I guess it could be a lot of things. But in my case, we lived in Berkeley. It was 1970 when my parents got divorced. And there was a lot of crazy stuff going on there, a lot of drugs and grown-ups going off to find themselves despite their responsibilities, free love, and um, the Black Panthers were like running the schools that we went to. It was very, very chaotic. The old social rules were breaking down pretty fast. There were a few old-fashioned parents in our neighborhood. I was very artful at making friends with kids whose parents had the domestic life together. So I always had a place to go, something to eat. I was taught to sew and knit and hammer nails and things when none of that was happening at my own home. So I had typical symptoms of trauma. And I had to figure out what to do. I used to go to therapy quite a lot for years. And as it turns out, I'm in the proportion of people who were traumatized as kids who don't respond that well to talk therapy. It would make me very dysregulated, but we just didn't have a word for that back then. I would just get very flustered and I remember joking and saying, if there was a cartoon of me right now, it would be somebody with X's for eyes, just like a zombie. I would get very checked out and emotional and checked out at the same time, but unable to process information. And I remember, like, I would tell therapists, like, I feel like this is just making me feel worse, not better. And they'd say stuff like, well, you're processing a lot of stuff. And I did have a lot of stuff, but what it turns out what was going on is I was not able to process it because all the talking was very disruptive to my ability to do that. Now we know that traumatized kids often have difficulty processing, meaning to take a very charged, kind of endocrine charged with adrenaline, cortisol experience and have it fade from that charged mode and turn into a memory where you can say, yeah, I remember when that happened. It was very upsetting, but your heart doesn't start pounding every time it comes up. So what it feels like, I call it a bag of cats in your head. It's just like, blah, 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 it's just like too many thoughts, too many feelings. It's very overwhelming. It's very hard to be perceptive about what you're seeing in present time. So I would I would go on a date, and what I needed very badly was a red flag detector, but there was just so much noise in my head. I couldn't really perceive nuances like, is the person safe? Are they compatible? So I would just make horrible mistakes, and therapists would think I was being impulsive or self-destructive, but I wasn't. I was really just like, it was like I lost my powers of perception at critical moments, and then because I had an attachment wound, I would just get very like latched on to whoever that happened to be, and because I had an abandonment wound, I would never leave until it blew up in my face. So it cost me years of my life walking around with these trauma symptoms. No amount of talking about what happened would fix these practical problems. And so I learned by accident how to re-regulate my nervous system. I think you and I have talked about that. I'm happy to talk about it again. But I learned these very simple techniques, writing and meditation. I didn't know that I was dysregulated, so I didn't know that the good, clear feeling it gave me was re-regulation. I can say that now with confidence. But I learned this 31 years ago. Totally changed my life. But I had so many life problems at that point, just so many life problems, which is very, very normal for people who grew up in a rough home and who were neglected. It's just normal to have life problems around money, relationships, friendships, career, just getting along with people, knowing how to deal with conflict without either blowing up or running away or hiding your head in the sand. There's, to get out of the trauma reactions. I had no training in this. So I set about very seriously to make my life better. And a lot of this I kind of had to teach myself. A lot of it I sought mentorship from non-conventional sources, not therapy, in other words, and was able to gradually make great progress in my life and turn out very differently from how I think I was destined to turn out after growing up in my family. And it still gets me sometimes, but everything I learned, I wrote down. So in Re-Regulated, I write about how to get re-regulated. In Connectability, I talk about how to connect and get along with other people. And it is a skill, and it involves a lot of things like having boundaries, not running away at crucial moments, having diplomatic things to say when you're not sure what to say. I think I've told you I have an English husband. He's really good at that. He's taught me all kinds of things that you can say, like, you could be right. It's like rocket science to me, instead of like, how dare you criticize my thinking? You can just say, that's an interesting perspective. Tell me more. So I've learned a lot of social grace from people like him. I would consider him one of my mentors, even though he didn't sign up for the job. I just, have learned a lot from how he operates. And a priest, and a couple of priests, really, and a couple of people I knew through 12-step recovery, including the woman who sponsored me, who taught me some things that you need to be told, that somebody's got to teach you this stuff. And then a lot of it I learned from literally watching TV about people who appear to be high functioning, about how are you supposed to have these conversations. I was so feral. I had to teach myself how to use a knife and a fork together when I was 12. We just didn't have sit down meals when I was a kid. And I know that's not everybody's story, but it's something like that for everybody. There was a deficit. And so I didn't want to be some lone wolf weirdo, but I was. And so I taught myself how to come out of it, and it's step by step. And so some of the things that get in the way are a lack of boundaries. If you don't have boundaries, you can't really be close to people. A lot of people who haven't yet learned how to have boundaries, and a boundary is like where you walk away. If you don't have a line where you can walk away from a situation if it gets uncomfortable, then you have to either shut down, yell at them. I mean, what are you going to do? You're going to be trapped in a situation. What most of us end up doing is we don't say yes to invitations unless we have absolute certainty that nothing hard will be demanded of us. And that's how you get isolated. But if you know, I don't know, I'll go check it out. I'll go see what it's like. I know that I'm not going to put up with abuse. I know that I'm not going to sit around while people become obnoxious. I know how to make a graceful exit. So I'm not afraid to say yes to invitations. It's all about like you go from having a very tiny life that has to be very controlled so that you can manage the dysregulation and the stress to letting it get gradually bigger. I'm a huge fan of titration, gradual expansion, because I almost without exception, everybody I've worked with, and I've worked with thousands now on this problem, they will get they'll have one little success. They'll go, great, I'll do 10 changes tomorrow. And then that's too much. And then you have to go back in your hole for a while. So the best progress is slow and steady, doing a little bit every day, gradually expanding how daring you are about how connected you're willing to be.
I I love what you said there about boundaries, and having those boundaries actually gives you the freedom to engage in social situations because you know what you will put up with and what you won't. And it's almost like you're almost like being a parent to yourself there, because you're just saying like, I'm going to take care of myself in the situation, and if it's not right for me, I can take myself out, and that's really, really powerful. As you were speaking there though, Anna, something a question came up for me that I was just curious to ask. If you had the choice to go back and not go through the hardship that you've been through, would you take it? And the reason I'm asking, I'm diabetic, and I've had that since I was 6, and honestly, I don't know if I would, if I could go back to be, if I went back to 6 and someone told me you can take this away now, I probably would just take it anyway, because it's been so formative for me and it's taught me so much, and it's the hardest thing about my life has been one of the best things because it's made me a better person. So just curious
Yeah.
about your experience on that with everything you've been through.
Well, I wouldn't wish it on anyone. I wouldn't wish it on anyone. But I have sort of a similar feeling about it as you do. I think I knew who I was even before the trauma really got going hard and heavy. I think in a way I knew my own spirit, that I am like the work that I do today at age 62 is so right and natural for me, who I've always been, that the things that I loved as a child, the stories, the movies were always about a girl who figures out how to heal and shares it with everyone. That was always like the most wonderful story. To this day, I love stories about personal transcendence like that. And I recognized myself in that, and always, whatever was going on in my life, I found some way to sort of express that. It's who I am. And so I will admit, I feel a little bit like I couldn't do what I do now unless I had been through what I've been through. I have a unique role in this world of talking about trauma. I'm not a therapist or a doctor. I have a good education, but it's not in psychology. I have a very good education as well in the School of Hard Knocks and having to work these problems out in an era when there wasn't real help for it. And and then I've had 30 years of experience teaching it to others. As soon as I started recovering, people, the difference in me was so dramatic when I learned to re-regulate, that people were immediately asking me, what happened? Will you show me how you did that? And so a miracle happened for me that I was able to run with, share with other people. And it's always been the most compelling thing in my life to share it with other people. I feel like it's something like finding a cure to cancer. I don't want to make myself so important, but so many people are laboring under the limitations of trauma that it's a big deal to have something very simple, that even if they have no money, even if they have no access to professional help, even if they've given up hope, I have a simple approach to healing that just might help them. It's helped hundreds of thousands of people. And so it's an unusual role. And the only way that I could have this knowledge is if I had to learn it myself. And the only way that people would find me credible my fellow, the men and women around the world, and they are all over the world, who recognize themselves when I talk about what it's like to have what I have, to have these symptoms. They find it credible because I lived it. So there's no other way that I could help people in this way. And I feel overjoyed about the number of people that this technique has been able to help. Nothing is more meaningful to me. That It's right up there maybe with having children and raising them. I love my kids, I think, a little bit more than you're supposed to. I really, really love my sons, and I believe in them so much. That's been a wonderful part of my life as well, and very healing, by the way. But I accept my lot in life for this. But I'm sort of crossing my fingers, like, please, no more, no more. And for all I know, we all know we're going to have suffering in the future, and eventually we'll die. So my prayer is really just that whatever is coming, that I'll be able to handle it in a way that I'm able to still find my joy and still be useful to other people.
Amazing, amazing. Thanks for sharing that. And for there'll be people listening to this that haven't heard our past conversations. Could you just give them the big picture overview of the daily practice that turned everything around for you, Anna?
Well, when I was 30, this was in 1994, I had become suicidally depressed. I had had a bad couple of months where earlier that year, I had gotten my heart broken, which had me in a pretty significant depression. My mother was dying of cancer. She was living much longer than expected. So it was this sort of dragged out experience of the last time I would, and she was a plane flight away from me. So I was visiting her, but it really was the last time. And the last time I saw her was right after this precipitating event happened. I was randomly attacked on the street. 4 guys. I think it was gang violence of some kind. It was random. They beat me unconscious and broke my jaw and my teeth. And I woke up in the middle of it all somehow and screamed really loud, and it stopped, and the cops came and took me to the hospital. But I think while I was unconscious there was some decision that I made, and that's how I remember it. I don't feel anger at the guys. I feel grateful for that moment of decision where I was like, no, wait, I really want to live. I really want to live. And this had happened, but I was struggling afterwards to carry on. I had PTSD really bad from the attack. And believe it or not, in 1994, the doctor didn't call it that. The therapist didn't call it that. But I had just classic symptoms. I kept flashing back to the attack. Anything moving in my left field of vision, I would suddenly fall to my knees crying. It was PTSD. And as is often the case, an adult trauma will often sort of open up Pandora's box of the old childhood trauma that until that time, I had compartmentalized fairly well. I had some problems. But once that attack happened, I could not hold my life together. And I was shooting my mouth off. I was saying, irrational. I sounded crazy and I sounded hostile. I almost lost my job. I made a threatening comment at work, which was totally out of character. I was this nice girl, and I was just out of my mind. I had a head injury, and I feel so sorry for myself that nobody was really helping me with the real problem. So the doctor looked at my brain and said, "You're fine. Your brain is not bleeding." And the therapist had me come 3 times a week to keep talking about the assault. The idea then was you should talk a lot about these traumas and then they will somehow neutralize for you. But that wasn't what was happening. It was getting worse and worse, and it was scrambling my ability to process information or regulate my emotions. And I was getting worse. And to make matters worse, they were putting me on medications that I am quite sure were completely counterproductive. What I've learned since then is that talking about talking about trauma for a lot of us is dysregulating, and insurance will often pay for a certain amount of therapy. And if you don't get better, which you won't if you're dysregulated, then they're like, okay, time for medication. And I think a lot of psychoactive medications can actually be inhibiting to our natural ability to re-regulate. That's my experience. And you can talk to a pharmacologist if you prefer, but that's my solid experience and what I've witnessed in other people. I never try to interfere with anybody's decision to take medication or not. But I will say I've noticed that the nuance of learning to re-regulate has a nuance to it that I need all my wits. One of the best things I ever did was stop drinking alcohol for many years. And, I live in California. It was normal for me to casually smoke marijuana, all of that. I just was like, I need every bit of consciousness I've got to come back online here. And I started to have these very strong experiences of a renewal of my focus, energy, and self-regulation. Even though I didn't have words for it yet, it was a very powerful and dramatic change in me that happened very quickly, and I didn't want to mess with it. And I stayed off almost any medication I could possibly stay away from. I wouldn't even take ibuprofen if I could help it. I wanted to have my brain fully working for me. And I'm not advocating that for everybody. I know some people need medication. I take thyroid medication. I don't have a thyroid. If I didn't take it, I'd die. So I'm not knocking all medication, but consciousness. I had a very spiritual experience at this time too. And what happened was a friend, an acquaintance, I told her that I was feeling suicidal, that I was feeling hopeless, that I wasn't going to get better. And she just very casually, in a very friendly way, said, "Do you want me to show you this thing that I learned that helped me stay sober?" So alcohol was never my problem. Um, but I've always related to alcoholics because their quest for sobriety feels very parallel to my quest for lucidity and for self-regulation. It feels life and death to me. I don't think everybody has it that bad, but I had it bad. And she showed me a very simple writing technique and a meditation technique. And it was something not everybody in, she learned it from somebody in AA, but not everybody in AA did it. Some people in AA would even make fun of the people who did it, but they called it the daily steps. It was like a lot of step work compared to other people in 12-step recovery. And it was very focused on specific things. And one is writing fearful and resentful thoughts on paper and asking God to remove them. And then with a very specific prayer. And I always want to qualify this and say it's very specific. I teach this in a free course. I teach it in the original version I learned as well as a secular version for those who prefer that. And you but you in effect are asking for this bag of cats basically to be removed from your head. You're naming specifically with specificity and with wording that makes it clear that you're willing to release it. I would like this stuff removed. And then there's a follow-up to the prayer of asking for knowledge of what we're meant to be doing instead of being overwhelmed by our thoughts right now. What's my right action here? And asking for the power to do that. I find it to be like I've subsequently learned a lot about theology, religion, philosophy, many forms of spirituality and meditation. And I love this prayer. It's the simplest thing possible. It's just like, take all this junk, show me what it is I'm supposed to be doing, thinking, and being, and give me the power to do that. It's so simple, and it's got no demand for a Cadillac or a particular boyfriend or anything in it. It's just like, show me, show me. And it's really like the only prayer that's ever worked for me. And it worked so powerfully that I just changed dramatically. In 2 weeks, I went from having severe PTSD and being unable to focus or talk like a normal person. And granted, my job would not give me time off for this. They gave me a week and that's it. The doctor said take 3 months. And then they gave me a week, and I had to work. So I would be at work trying not to shoot my mouth off, but I was hiding in the back room, writing my fears and resentments and then meditating. And I would feel guilty. I'm a stickler for honesty. That is theft of time from the employer, I believe, morally. On the other hand, given that I had to be there, by using these techniques, I was able to show up and be fully present and use my head and be able to get a job done better than I'd ever done before. And it was just 2 weeks in, this changed for me. I sat in a business meeting one day, and for the first time, I was able to just listen to everything for a full hour and take it in. I'd never done that before. Listening to a bunch of people talk was usually sort of, I'd be in and out of listening. I'd be mostly thinking about the past, the future, or what I was going to say when it was my turn. And instead, I was just taking information in. It was the most intense experience. I thought, wow, I can use my mind the way I want to use my mind. It was such a superpower. And so in that first meeting where it happened, I heard what everybody said. And then I have a very analytical mind. I learned later when I went to grad school a year later, like all these things became possible for me. Went to this very hard grad school. It was hard to get into. But I scored very highly on the analytical reasoning thing. I didn't know I had that. So I'd be sitting there hearing what everybody said, and I could sort of like, I see the solution. And so then I would just be like, well, I heard this, this, and this. What if we did this? And people's jaws just dropped open. Like that crazy woman over there, she just said something really useful. And it was no time at all before my career took off. And I went to grad school. They let me in well after admissions were closed into a program where they only accept 1 in 10 applicants. And I was older than everybody. And just like all these odds were against me. But I had this amazing mind all of a sudden. So I was able to move forward. But here's the downside. I just still had no idea how to date men in any kind of way that turned out well. And it kept being a disaster for me. I was always in debt. I just continued to have problems that do have to be worked out in real time through practical knowledge and change. There's no magic pill to make that change. It takes practice. So my work, I call myself Crappy Childhood Fairy. That's what I named my YouTube channel when I started out. Hopefully that makes it clear. I'm not trying to replace a therapist. I'm just there. I'm helping with the practical problem of how do you do this? How do you decide, who's a good person to date? How do you set yourself free to have a promotion when you can't stand the people you work with? What is the steps that you would go through to make a change like that? And how can you become connected to people? This is like the heart of the matter. How can you be connected to people when you've lived your life totally triggered by people, which often results in a lot of very negative beliefs about people. They're all against you, or all the people of this gender are just no good. You can never trust them. Or all the people of this, who are poor, rich, whatever it is, black, white, this distrust or this animosity that's all driven by a tendency to get dysregulated. When you can lose all of that, you do get to be discerning about who's a good person to have in your life. You must be discerning, but that information is not available until you've cleared up the dysregulation. And then you begin by practicing. And I feel like what a lot of us have dealt with is a developmental delay. That's what I call it. That 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 there's neuroplasticity, and I guess my jury's out on how much of all of this is neurobiology. Some of it, but probably not all of it. I think there's a developmental delay. There's just things we were supposed to learn about how to share and have delayed gratification and be discerning and detect red flags that we have to learn a little later than the normal time, but we can learn it with tools and with people in our lives who understand and are either working that process too, or are a little further along down the path.
Uh, There's so much in there, Anna. When you're talking about the practice, for me, like what comes to mind is whenever someone goes through like something really difficult, developmental trauma or the PTSD you experience from that attack, your brain gets very sort of, I suppose, flooded. There's a lot of noise there, and what your practice seems to do is there's an emptying there. And
Mm-hmm.
for me, that's really interesting because I interview a lot of people about consciousness and these kind of topics. And I spoke with a guy a couple of months ago, and he says like his view on consciousness is that it's not that the brain produces it; it's that more that the brain is a channel for it. So whenever you do a practice like your own, you're essentially emptying all of that noise out, and you're asking for that consciousness or that guidance to come in, and that then brings you back to life and allows you to live as you were meant to, or
Yeah.
at your best, if that makes sense.
Yes, exactly. It allows you to open your channel. And that's really the significant part. When I teach it, I just talk about finding emotional ease, from all the intensity of it all, and a release of stress. But really, what ends up happening, this is the more advanced stage. I mean, it happens very quickly, but in teaching it first, I need to show people how to release the stress. But then what happens is the channel opens and insight comes. So all kinds of, let's call them downloads, come, where ideas come, problems to solutions come, and intuitive knowledge comes about things. It's not always right. That's the wonderful thing about being human, is you get these crazy ideas sometimes. I know just what I need to do. And sometimes you're wrong, but the only way for your development to proceed is to experience the mistake and to feel the mistake and then to find your way through it. That is the path. That is the lesson. And so I'm not saying like we're divinely ordered to make a mistake, but that's just part of being human. So many times I thought, oh, this is it. It's going to be this man. And I've been married twice. And the first husband I was sure was the one, and he wasn't, was he? And we know that with certainty now because he's not married to me anymore. He's the father of my kids. He's still my friend. There's a lot of purpose to that relationship, but it's not what I thought it was and what I was really like hell bent on making happen at the time. And so I've made many mistakes. Or another time, I thought that I wanted to. I had this strong idea. We write and then we meditate for 20 minutes. And in the meditation, I always keep an extra pad of paper. There's the pad of paper for the fears and resentments that I wrote in order to meditate. And by the way, it really helps to get this stuff out in order to meditate. There's a little bit more quiet to meditate, a little less bag of cats, because many people find it hard to meditate. My form of meditation is very forgiving. It's okay if your mind wanders. It's not the end of the world. The object of the game is to rest. And I do believe my mind, and I think for other people, there's it comes back together. It recomposes itself into a proper working order during that period of rest, just like sleep would do for us. It sort of repairs. I think living with trauma, there's a lot of like, you need repair more often than overnight. You need repair as needed throughout the day. You just need it often. Like a person might need oxygen. I need it less than I used to, but when I need it, I do it. And if I go into resistance of doing it, I do it at my own peril. Because sometimes I'm like, oh, I just want to keep driving right now. I don't want to stop and have to write a little bit of this and release a little bit. But the thing is, when I hold all that in, it does block the channel, and I don't get these great ideas. And so my whole work is Crappy Childhood Fairy. There's 1,100 videos and webinars and books and all these things. And I'm saying something that's both educated by other people's experience and work and research, but also a novel message, from my own experience. And I I make YouTube videos every week, and there's nothing worse than not feeling inspired but having to make your videos anyway. I guess anybody who works online knows the feeling. There are days when it's just like you're just pushing it out, and it's so much better if I've got my channel open and I'm just sort of like I'm attuned. It's attunement is a very key word in what happens with healing. High level healing from trauma is attunement returns or comes for the first time, where you can feel, you can read the room, you can sense where other people are coming from, you can understand your own motives and thoughts a little better. They're not just like crude, a stampede of buffaloes running through your mind. It's just like, all right, I see what's happening here. You can pause when you need to pause. But the other beautiful thing is you can go, you know what I want to make a video about? Female bullying. This thing that's something that's really been on my heart, and I just think now is the moment. And it comes out and boom, it hits a lot of people. And people will say, gee, I don't know, you just have the right timing. And it's like that divine timing of like allowing myself to like lose all the clutter in my head about it, the very cluttered heart and mind, and have a new idea come. But as with everything, sometimes I really bomb out. The ideas are just terrible and the video doesn't do well. And that's totally fine. Every time you fail, you get to just write more. I fear I failed. Fear I'm no good. And then that gets out on paper. You got to get that out of the way because that's not really useful. What's useful is like, why didn't the video do well? Could I do better? Those are thoughts that you can only have when you're regulated.
100%.
Yeah.
So there's a really important nuanced idea in the book that I think is worth kind of underlying here. And it's that, there's so much talk about how disconnected we are as a society and, we need connection and all the rest. But if you're coming from a place of neurological dysregulation, like you can't just run out and start connecting with people because you might not, it might not go that well. So what you're really saying is you've sort of got to connect internally first and regulate first and then connect. Is that fair to say? Is it?
Well, I discourage anyone from thinking of it like you're going to get perfect and all better, and then you're going to have relationships with people, because it never works like that. It's an ongoing process. I always laugh. There's no island of healed people that you're waiting to land on. You're in it now. You're in the island of people who are kind of there, and it's called Earth. you know, we're all kind of there, and some people more than others. And so we're working on our own struggles to get a little better at it. And as you get better, your eyes open to start noticing who's very gifted at it. You can sort of ally with them. You also wake up to some of the people in your life really oughtn't to be there. And you've been hanging on to them because you thought you couldn't do better. But almost everybody who grew up with trauma or who struggles with connection, their lives are populated with people who are cruel or troubled, so troubled that they bring trouble. And that's what to do about that. That's a good thing to get out of the way. But so all of this happens in real time, kind of all at once, and we try to take it a little bit here, a little bit there. My theory is the first thing to do is the thing that's right in front of you, whatever that might be. When in doubt, go outside and move your body a little bit. That never fails to be helpful to anything you're trying to do neurologically or emotionally. Go outside and just move around a little bit. And then after that, to start focusing. I think this is a big mistake of our zeitgeist, of the way we look at mental health and trauma in particular. Trauma culture looks so heavily at the cause, at what was done to us, at who's to blame. And it was done, and they are to blame. However, knowing that does not have much we can use to change our lives. And so, working online and seeing there's a lot of influencers out there, you can get a lot of clicks. And I know about clicks. I like clicks. I often put a very juicy click and then give the healthy meal in the video. I think a lot of people do that, but I just think there's too much stuff out there talking about trauma as if it's this thing that's caused by those other people. And it just like there, as somebody who has tried to change other people with all my heart, it can't be done. You can't change other people. You also can't change the past. And so my trauma, a whole bunch of it, it's in the past. It was done by other people. It's not changeable. The part that's changeable is how I'm affected by that. So I think there's been a dearth of knowledge about what to do about this. There's been a lot of false information about what to do about having these symptoms. I suffered. I almost died because I couldn't get good help on what do I do, even though I was in therapy 3 times a week. I think therapy has expanded so much now. There are more methods. And one form of therapy that has been tremendously helpful was EMDR for me. I can't say enough good things. EMDR by a practitioner who didn't make me talk about it. Like he was like, think of the thing that was so traumatic, now think of this. And I didn't have to say what it was. And it worked like a charm. I tried EMDR with somebody who was very sympathetic and said, oh, that must have been hard for you. And it was like, whoop, right out into dysregulation. I don't even judge it. I just do what works. I just try to do what works. So I think that our approach has been too expert centric. You wait for your appointment for 50 minutes on Tuesday, and then that's supposed to do the trick. And I just, when you have CPTSD, you need tools that you can use all the time as needed. And then the focus really needs to come within. And so anyway, these YouTube channels or Instagram channels that just go on and on about other people, a lot of what I feel like I'm doing when I work with people who choose to work with me, and when I do coaching, I do it as a troubleshooting. I don't go into their past with them. It's not a treatment plan. I'm just like, what's the problem? But I help people. I just try to help them keep noticing where they divert their mind from the problem at hand, which is, I got into this relationship with this person I don't like, and I got to figure out how to get out of it. But if I leave, I'm going to fall into abandonment melange and get so depressed I can't get through it. So I'm afraid to leave. So let's say somebody would like some practical tips on what to do about that. And so almost everybody, when they first come to me, it's hard for them to talk about what their symptom actually is and focus in on, so where was the decision? Where was the point where you kind of lost your best judgment about, should you be here? Let's see if we can, walk through this again on how you might have done this differently. It can be almost impossible for people who have come through conventional treatment methods to not get sidetracked on, well, I do this because my mom, and I do this because so-and-so's a narcissist, and because this. And I'm like, I don't doubt that. But coming back to the point where you actually have some some influence and leverage on the problem, where did you, when you were making that decision, did you see any red flags right then? Like, let's look at that. Do you think you could strengthen your red flag detector? Is there anything you could do to stay more present? It takes a lot of self-discipline at first to stay present with yourself instead of distracted onto, how other people have caused all of this. And on YouTube, I get to not only see how people who meaningfully engage with my content respond, but I get like the haters and stuff who are just like, how dare you say that? Like, a big problem for traumatized people is underemployment and under earning. It's very common. It's a very painful problem, and it can be overcome. And many of us have overcome it. But there will be people when I say, okay, here's what you do. You have to like start putting yourself in the shoes of the employer. You have to think about, if you want to stay with this employer, if you feel like this is a good place for you, what do they need? What would be helpful to them? How can you make them successful? And this is actually common sense to me now. But when I first heard this, I was just like, oh, blame the victim. Don't they owe me a job? Does like, what about my feelings? And I was familyifying the job and the employer. So I teach people like, just try to take that out of it. Just think on a practical level. What would make an employer want to promote you? And they might be somebody who's unfair. They're against your race or your gender, might be, which means they're not a good fit. And the logical thing would be to get somewhere else where there is a good fit and potential for you. I think, but a lot of people get bogged down with society shouldn't be this way. There shouldn't be capitalism. There shouldn't be racism. I'm like, well, of course there shouldn't be racism, but given that right now, today, you need a job, let's see, what are you going to do? And so that can be very, very challenging to people who have come up the conventional way, where talking to people face to face and sort of having to confront things where it's like, well, could you make another choice even though there's an injustice right there, is a very hard thing to hear. And this is where YouTube comes in handy, because you can say things like that and allow people to relate to that idea in their own way. They're not stuck with you. They didn't pay for your time or anything. They can relate to that idea and say, I can use that idea, or I can't use that idea. I don't like it. And they have that freedom. And I think YouTube is lovely for that. It's a good medium for me to teach ideas. So having grown up in the hippie era and with a lot of my peers suffering to this day with the idea that society didn't change enough for them to be okay. I feel lucky that I'm one of the people who focused within and said, well, what can I do about myself anyway? And I found that a lot of change is possible no matter what's going on around me.
I think a big takeaway for me from this conversation on it is this subtle shift from focusing on why something happened to what can I actually do about it in this moment, and that's so
Yeah.
so simple, but such a powerful North Star for your life, you know?
Yeah, it is. And it's not to knock. It's a holy moment when somebody finally hears your story and understands you and says, yeah, that's really bad. That's a very powerful moment in healing, but it's not the whole banana. It's a door opening, I think. And it's a door that might not even open at the beginning of your healing. It might come later, or it might come in stages. But the question of what can I do right now is the most potent question you can ask yourself. And and we have to forgive a lot of the mistakes we make along the way. Like, having to be totally responsible for my own healing in some ways made me err on the side of over functioning, I think, or just being like overly tough on myself. But whatever, it kept me alive. It kept me alive so I could keep learning and keep unfolding in the nuance. And now, 31 years into it, I don't know what's next, like what's the next thing I'm going to learn, but I know that I'll keep learning. And the point that I'm in right now, the thing that I'm learning is really how lovely people are. I had no idea. I had no idea that they're really not just a bunch of jackasses. Occasionally people are in certain moments, maybe chronically, but by and large, what delights me is to discover that we're all sort of working together. There was this children's book called Busy, Busy Town by Richard Scarry. I don't know if you had that in Ireland. It's these little animal people, and they drive the bus, and they take people on the ferry, and they bake the bread. And as a kid, I was so fascinated with it. We lived across from San Francisco. When you drive across the bridge from Berkeley to San Francisco, you from the top of the bridge, you can see into the busy, busy town. And I would imagine there were all these little bears and cats and things baking the bread and everything. And I would just think, I want to live there. Like, that looks like a happy place. But that is where I live. And I live in Oakland, California. My busy, busy town includes a bit of rough edges. You know, we have a high crime rate and things. There's that too. But by and large, what I experience walking down the street, walking into a shop, you know, anything is people are cooperating with each other. They're being polite. They're being helpful. They're trying to serve bread that they made. You know, they're just like, my eyes kind of open to what a lovely interconnectedness we're all living and we're in the middle of. You can't even escape. It's hard to escape. We're born into the human family. So this inner maturation comes through connectability, which is my word for that ease and grace of dealing with people that makes them want to be around you. So as we grow in that, we start to have the lovely side of the experience of people, much more appreciation and beauty to be acknowledged in people instead of endless struggle and how am I going to get through this and be okay. I'll tell you a funny thing, Niall. I had a dream just this morning. I woke up very distressed. I dreamed that all my teeth were knocked out, very, very symbolic. But also, I'd lost my home and I couldn't find my husband and I didn't have any money. And I had to walk around my childhood neighborhood trying to find anybody I knew to try to explain. Like, I don't know what to do. I don't know where to go. I just sort of lost my bearings and everything. But I couldn't find anybody that I knew. I was a stranger to everybody I encountered. And I woke up just in such distress. And then I woke up in my house. My husband was there sleeping next to me. To have a husband is such a tremendous gift and something I never thought I'd have, and such a kind man. And that in another part of the house, my son Jack was sleeping, and my cat was at the foot of the bed. And I have a bank account, and I was going to be meeting with you today, and I was just like, oh, thank God. I thank God. I thought I was disconnected there. I thought I had nothing in my dream. I'm very, very grateful for what I have. I'd like everybody to have these basic things of people to love them and enough, enough to meet their basic needs so that they can be on the enjoyment end of life as soon as possible.
Amazing, amazing. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. Yeah, like from what you've said there, it just makes me think like connectability is our natural state. You know, that's kind of what we're born for. And the book you've written here is, as I mentioned earlier, it's a manual for moving in that direction in your life. And just one last question before we wrap up. You talk about gamifying acts of connection, which I think is kind of fun and interesting. You know, is there any, for someone listening to this that would like to play a connection game or do something like that, anything you'd suggest?
Well, I give a point system. I say try to get 3 points a day. Don't feel like you have to do 10 points a day. So different acts have different point values. So a 1 point thing that was literally the first thing I did when I decided that I had to work on my connectability, when I realized, you know, I was a single mom. I'd been in the hospital for a month with a surgery. I had no one to help me. And I set about, like, I have to learn to connect with people better. So the first thing I did, I give you 1 point for this, is before you go outside, don't look out the window to see if anybody's out there so that you can wait until they're not out there. That's what I used to do. I didn't want to see the neighbors. And so I would only go out if I'd check. I laugh at it now, but it's totally normal and common to feel that way. So that's 1 point. 3 points would be, I have this friend and we used to be closer, but we're not now. And I want to sort of see if we can have a coffee and feel out whether there's anything wrong or not. I may or may not ask them if anything's wrong. I'm just going to have a coffee and I'm going to try to show up and be present and listen. That's 3 points. You get 3 points even if you ask, even if they don't say yes. You get another 3 points if you have the coffee and it does come up that something was awkward and you can resolve it. So a lot of what becomes necessary to keep moving to an advanced level of the game is to be humble, to be honest, to be able to ask questions where you might be afraid of the answer. Well, I am angry at you. Well, you did do something that offended me. To be ready for that and to be able to receive it graciously. So I teach in the book, like, literally how to have social grace, how to reduce the temperature if a conversation's getting heated, how to receive feedback graciously. That's like towards the final third of the book. These are the advanced things. And these are the things that allow you to save good relationships, repair them, and make new ones too, with new people who fit the new you, the person who is honorable and connected and coming from the heart and not so defensive. You can find people just like you, as you keep rising in your ability to connect with people. It's a joy.
For sure. That's beautiful. Um, yeah, a bonus one that I found quite helpful as well is like, so every morning where I live in Dublin, I would walk to the gym, and I pass the same people pretty much every day because we're on the same. Humans are just creatures of habit, creatures of rhythm.
Yeah.
And I thought, I'm going to pass this person every single day. So why don't I just get to know their name and ask them a bit about themselves? So I've done that with maybe 3 people that were on the same kind of
Ah,
cadence. So now it's not strangers walking past each other. It's actually, I know their names, and we get to have a brief interaction, and you sort of feel like you're living amongst friends then, as opposed to strangers. It's a small thing, but it makes a difference to your day, you know?
it does make a difference. It does make a difference, and it's very healing in its own right. It's a counter trauma.
I guess so.
Yeah.
Well, I definitely recommend getting the book Connectability. When does it release officially?
October 7th.
October
And you
7th.
can get it anywhere. Yeah, you can get it online anywhere. And if it's not in your local bookstore, you can ask them to carry it. But it's
And I would definitely recommend reading Re-Regulated as a companion as well. 2 extremely valuable books. So, Anna, it's been such a pleasure as always.
yes.
And your website and your YouTube, where can people find you online?
It's called Crappy Childhood Fairy, both the website and the YouTube channel. Most people come to the YouTube channel first. It's the most accessible. If you want to learn the writing and meditation techniques, I have a free course. I'll give you a link for that you can share with everybody if they'd like to take that. And if they'd like a quiz about being connectable too, like to just rate themselves right now, like how connectable am I? I'll give you that too. And you can connect them to it.
Awesome. Okay. Thank you, Anna.
Thank you.
If you enjoyed this episode, you might also enjoy getting our 7 Insights newsletter. This is a once per month email where I share 7 of the most valuable insights I've uncovered in the previous 30 days. It includes book, podcast, and documentary recommendations, as well as questions and quotes specifically curated to help you live a more creative, intentional, and meaningful life. It currently goes out to over 50,000 subscribers each month, and if you're interested in joining them, you can sign up at 7insights.org.